In this video, we are following up from the previous video where we built a meeting summarizer inside of MindStudio. Now we're taking a look at how to add a Zapier webhook to send that response somewhere else. In our example, it will be Slack, but as this is connected to Zapier, you can connect it to over 6,000 different applications like Notion, Google Docs, Google Sheet, Teams, or whatever else you want. The process is exactly the same. We are getting the user input, which is a transcript. We are generating the meeting summary using the send message prompt, but we did change the assignment, the response behavior. Before, we were displaying it to the user and then the user chatted with the response. Now we are assigning it to a variable, response, because we need that variable in our Zapier webhook. To add a function in MindStudio, you can always right-click with your mouse and click on Run Function, or you can click on the plus icon and click on Run Function to include it in an existing workflow. From the Run Function block, you need to click on Browse Community Functions and find the Zapier webhook. The Zapier webhook is usually the last element. Click on Import and you will see it requires a Zapier webhook URL and an input. We already have those here, but we're going to do it again together. The important part is that we are assigning this to a variable because we need that to be the input of our Zapier webhook. We need to send the response from our AI to Zapier. Now let's go to Zapier, and this is what the Zap looks like. We are catching a webhook, and the webhook will contain the data, which is a summary, and sending that summary as a DM in Slack. Let's build it together by going back to the dashboard, create, and new Zap. The trigger in this case is a webhook. Search for webhook. Webhook is a premium function in Zapier, so you do need a premium account in order to use it. Then select the event catch hook. This will generate a webhook that you can then use inside of MindStudio. Click on Continue. You do not need a child key, so you can click on Continue again, and here you will see the webhook. Click on Copy and navigate back to MindStudio. You can add it here in the webhook URL. Let's do it in the existing function, replacing it with the previous one. The input is going to be response. We are using the curly brackets because the response is actually a value that I collected here. So it will show the actual summary and send that as the input to this webhook URL. Finally, we are showing the response to the user. The reason is that this will now be sent to Slack, meaning that there is nothing in our UI and this will redirect directly to the chat if I don't do anything else. So what I'm doing here is displaying to the user and sending as a system to not use tokens, and I'm displaying the value in that response. Remember that display to user system simply replaces whatever you have in the variables with the content. It does not call the AI. There is no operation happening here. All it's doing is sending this message exactly as is, but with the content of this variable rather than the variable name. Now let's click on Publish, and our MindStudio side of things is ready. However, we still have something to do in our Zapier Zap. So now click on Test Trigger, and you will see there's no request found. That's because we need to test the webhook URL. To do that, go back to MindStudio, go back to the Zapier webhook, and copy the webhook URL. Then from the left side panel, click on Functions, Zapier webhook, and Test Data. Here, input the webhook URL and something in the input. For example, test. Then click at the top right corner, and it will send something. Data sent to Zapier, test. Finished execution in 119 milliseconds. So now going back to Zapier, we can click on Test Trigger again, and you will see it does find a request and that the data sent with this request is test. Click on Continue with selected record. The second step here is to send this response, this value, somewhere else. In our example, we are sending to Slack, but again, you can send it wherever you want. We actually have an integration with Slack directly. We have a run function Slack. So if you do want to connect with Slack, that might be easier, but I'm trying to showcase how you can use Zapier and then send from Zapier to wherever you want. It's just that Slack is an easier channel to understand because everyone is quite used to it. Let's search for Slack, click on Slack, and select the event Send Direct Message. This will send a DM to a specific person in a Slack channel. In the account, choose your Slack account or connect a new account. I have one called Zapier. Select Continue, and to username has to map to the username you want to send the DM to. In my example, There are only 3 people in my Slack, Slackbot, Giorgio, Zapier. I obviously want to send this to myself, so I'm going to select Giorgio. Then in message text, we need to catch the response which contains the summary from the webhook. That's the webhook data. This data in the example is test, but in the real world, when we actually use the application, this data is the response. So it's the full summary the AI generated. We do want to send as bot. The bot name could be something like summary. We do not want to include a link to the Zap, and that's all we need to configure here. Click on Continue and Test Step. You can see the test is successful. Let me show you how that looks like in Slack. In Slack, we received a message from Slackbot with the bot named Summary saying test. That's because test is the content of the webhook right now. In our next test, we will actually use the application, and what will be sent is the response, and we will see the response, which is the summary here. Just to properly recognize what we're sending right now, I will add an icon here showing the number 1 and sending it. So we know that everything after this will be the response to the next test. Let's go back to MindStudio. Now we are ready to click on Publish and test the application live. Click on New Thread and upload the meeting transcript again. We will upload the same transcript we uploaded in the first video. If you want to understand how to build the meeting summarizer yourself, please take a look at video 1 in this series. Then let's select YouTube demo. It's a docx, it's being extracted, it's being processed, and then the AI is generating the summary. The AI will first send the summary to Zapier because the function comes before the display system message. You can see the application now shows what was sent because we have a send message block with display as system with the content of the response, which is the meeting summary. You can see it here with the participants, key decisions, action items, exactly the same thing we've seen in video 1, but it's being shown as the system message. Now let's look in Slack, where we actually received the message. Here's our Slackbot, and as you can see, after the number 1 icon we used before, we have the summary coming from the bot summary and the full meeting summary in Markdown. If you want to, you can ask the AI to generate this in Slack formatting. It's slightly different than Markdown, and it's definitely capable of generating a more proper output for Slack. But this is just an example and shows exactly the same thing that we had in MindStudio. Please note that if you followed this step by step, you should be able to have it on your own account, but remember, you need to publish the Zap before this will work. Hope this helps, and happy building!